Hi everyone, welcome to SPED 760 and your instructor insights for week 3. So this week is going to be all about functional behavioral assessment, otherwise known as FBA. So we will focus on further developing an understanding of behavior, key related principles, and applying the principles while completing an informal FBA BIP for a student. Specifically, we will learn how to identify and define problem and replacement behaviors, collect data, both indirect and direct, and then use these data to identify the possible function of behavior for a student. The student you choose should be one you can work with over the rest of the course as we complete different components of the FBA BIP and try out the associated intervention you will design next week. If you have questions about choosing a student for this project, please email me and I would be happy to help you problem solve. If we look at the tasks on our to-do list for this week, there's 2 of them. However, there's a lot of meat within them. So our first one is our discussion board number 3. There's going to be 2 different deadlines for this. It will be different than either the discussion boards for week 1 or week 2. However, week 3 and week 4 discussion boards will be similar. Then we have number 2, which is to begin working on the FBA and BIP part 1 for your student. This is not due until the end of week 4 because there's 2 main reasons. The first reason is I want you to have time to collect the data for your student, and I realize that in 1 week there's just not enough hours in the day for many of you to be able to do that for a student. The second thing is you're going to probably be going back and forth between your FBA and BIP over the course of the next 2 weeks based on feedback you get from peers in the discussion board and making tweaks and fine-tuning it. And I wanted you to have a chance to flow back and forth between the 2 parts 1 and part 2 before you turn it in for grading from me and before you actually begin to implement your intervention. So let's go ahead and take a look inside the course and see how all this plays out. So let me go back to my home here. Okay, so week 3, functional behavioral assessments. This is the overview. I went over that in the earlier slides. This is where your instructor insights will be. And here's your readings for the week. So there's not any required readings from the Otten and Tuttle text, our course text. However, chapter 14 is a good resource. You read it last week. There's a lot of information there that will complement the information that you'll be viewing and reading from this Iris Center module. So I have it listed right here, all the sections of this module that you should do. Don't worry, you won't do all of them this week. That's deliberate. You'll do the rest of them next week. So if we go into the Iris website, you'll start with the challenge. Here's just a little bit of an explanation. They have some really engaging videos, I think, that mix it up a little bit. You'll go into the initial thoughts, look at that section, and then in perspectives and resources. This is where you're really going to get the meat for part 1 of your FBA BIP, and you also will get many of the forms. The data collection documents that you'll use, you will pull from here. It'll all make sense once you start to go through the modules. Please go through all of them, and I would be taking some notes as I go through, and I would also have my FBA BIP part 1 template in front of me so that I can take some notes on that too before I begin working on it. I'll show you that document in a minute. Then down at the bottom, I do have some additional resources. These are things that if you want another lens, you want to take another look at ABC analysis, there's a a PDF here that gives a great explanation in addition to what you'll get in the IRIS module. There's another PDF on frequency and interval recording, and one on duration and latency. Also, Chapter 6 in Tuttle has some example FBA and BIPs. They're just examples. They're not perfect. They're not following, using the same format that we will, but they'll give you some ideas if you're looking for a place to begin. So our discussion board for this week, you will be posting by Friday at noon at least one question or section you would like to receive feedback on from part 1 of your FBA BIP. Please don't upload your entire template. Rather, just copy and paste a small section along with the specific feedback or questions you would like peers to help you with. So for example, maybe I want feedback on my replacement behavior because I'm wondering if I wrote it in a detailed enough and positive enough way. Maybe there's a way I can zero in on it more. Maybe I want feedback on my background information because I was having a really hard time paring it down and making it concise, and I want some feedback on that. So you'll do that by Friday at noon. Then you have until Sunday at noon to respond to at least 2 of your peers' posts by answering the questions and providing them feedback. I have the Sunday deadline at noon, so everyone gets some sort of response or feedback over the weekend to assist with any work they might be doing on Sunday or Monday or Tuesday. So that's why I've moved that deadline up a bit. So you post your question or section by Friday at noon, and then by Sunday at noon, you're going to respond to at least 2 of your peers' posts by answering the questions or providing them with feedback. Then I have a little bit of a rationale down here about why we're doing peer feedback and things like that. So please read this carefully. I just summarized it. Read it carefully, and then here's the rubric for scoring. So here is your FBA BIP Part 1, and it says up at the top, this assignment does not count toward the final grade. That's because it's not getting submitted or graded this week. Part 1 and Part 2 will get submitted during week 4, and that's when they'll be graded. So that's why it says that there. It is, in fact, graded just next week. So here's your template, Part 1. You'll go ahead and open it up, save it to your desktop, and then you will type right in it. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sections that encompass the 3 steps to completing an FBA. Then next week, we will do the BIP portion of it. That will be a different template that I will share with you. I'm just sharing chunks at a time. However, it will all be submitted together at the end of week 4. In parentheses, I gave you some hints about where you would get the information for some sections. So use that if it's helpful. You will be creating and attaching a graph displaying baseline data. There's an example of a graph within your IRIS module, so that will all become clear, and then you will use your functional assessment matrix here to complete this section. As long as you go ahead and complete each section using the data collection tools that are listed here, you'll find them in the IRIS website. If you have some own from your district or that you have created that are very similar to these that you'll find within the IRIS website, I'm fine if you use them. If you have any questions about whether or not your tools will work, let me know. I really want this to be a meaningful assignment and project for you. So having said that, you need to complete the following data collection documentation. Like I said, these forms are found within the IRIS website here, this module, and attach them. As long as you do that, so we have indirect, direct, and the functional assessment matrix, then you don't need to cite anything using APA this week. That's going to be your documentation right there, is attaching those data collection tools. And you can write right on them. You can type into them if you want to. It doesn't really have to be anything fancy. So at the end of next week, then, you will submit both parts and attach all the data collection documentation listed above. If you print and write on the documents, like I said, that works, or you can type. Just be ready to organize all of your data collection documentation into one PDF to submit along with part 1 and part 2 of your FBA and BIP. So you have all of your data collection in one PDF that you'll submit at the end of next week, and then you'll have part 1 and part 2 of your FBA and BIP in another PDF. So you'll submit 2 PDFs. Please do 2 PDFs. If you start to have several more, it's really cumbersome for me to grade, and it takes me a lot longer to grade. And then my feedback to you just isn't as good. So please help me out there. I probably would print this page off here and use it as a checklist to make sure that I include everything. So after reading all of this carefully, email me if you have any questions. I tried to lay it out in a way that you could, between this video and the template that you're going to download and this direction page here, you should be good to go. But there's going to be questions, so email me ahead of time, please. When you post your sections on the discussion board for feedback this week, that could also be a time to ask questions and get input too. And I'll be active on that discussion board and helping support everyone, in addition to your peers giving you feedback too. Okay, so enough of that. I wanted to share just a little bit about the FBA with you before you get started. So, like I talked about, there's 2 kinds. There's formal and informal. We're going to be doing ours. It's really an informal one. However, we're using a lot of formal pieces, and the reason I'm calling it an informal one is because many districts, when I was a special ed director too, there were processes we needed to go through to get consent to do a formal FBA. And I don't want you to have to do that. If you are doing this FBA as part of an IEP that you're doing for a student in your district, then you should follow whatever process and procedures they have as far as parental consent. So that's why we're using formal elements, but really it's an informal one because we're not going through any of the formal measures that are often required. And the reason that they're often required is because formal FBAs are required by law, especially for students with social, emotional, and behavioral type needs. As part of the FBA, the goal is to work smarter, not harder. It's generally simple and straightforward. It's best to develop it with a team. So if you're able to, over the next couple of weeks, talk with other special education teachers that work with the student, related service providers, administrators, teachers, that would be great. If you're in a situation where you can't, though, I completely get that. Just keep that in mind, that that's absolutely a great thing to do, and I encourage you to collaborate with others on this. The FBA is conducted before designing a behavior intervention plan, which we refer to as a BIP all the time. So the information collected during the FBA process can be used to make the BIP more effective. Occasionally there will be an emergency type situation where you might have to throw a BIP together for a student. But when doing that, you should always quickly then be getting together at some point and doing the FBA just to make sure that you have the appropriate BIP in place, and then you can make some revisions to it. So the FBA is 3 parts, and they're almost always done together and talked about together. But for the purposes of our learning, we're going to cover the FBA this week in 3 parts, and then next week use the information from the FBA to design the BIP. So the first part is to define the problem, also known as a target, and replacement behaviors. Then you're going to collect information and data. This is where everyone must be on the same page. Let me back up for a second. So when you're defining the problem, the target, and replacement behaviors, this is where everyone needs to be on the same page. And you can use your learning from last week's discussion board and assignment to help you clearly define the behavior. Really be thinking about that stranger test. And this is where, if you have the opportunity to collaborate with some colleagues, it would be a good time to kind of sort some of these things out and make sure that you're on the same page, because if others are going to be involved in doing the intervention for a student, you need to make sure that you're all understanding the problem and the replacement behaviors to be the same thing. So think about especially the discussion board from last week. The second part is that collection of information, that data. In this case, more is not always better for the data. And once again, be clear and concise. So you'll collect strengths and interests, which will be used primarily later in the BIP, background information, and baseline data. That information will be used to develop the hypothesis about why the problem behavior is occurring. So these three parts here are the basics of the FBA, and if they're done well and are clear and concise, that's going to make the development of your BIP much easier and the chances of your BIP working much greater. So a little bit more about data collection. So the purpose of data collection is to provide information on when, where, and how frequently the problem or target behavior currently occurs or how long it lasts. So data are collected from several sources: parents, teachers, students, and through several different means. So we have indirect data, which is data that we're going to be collecting about things that have happened in the past. So that's done through interviews and rating scales. And students, teachers, or parents can complete those. It's highly recommended to collect at least one piece of data from each the student, a teacher, and a parent, but I know sometimes this isn't possible, yet it's still highly encouraged. So you might be able to, for example, get a rating scale from a parent and then an interview from a student and a teacher. So that would be one from each of the sources. Ideally, you would get an interview from the student, teacher, and parent, and a rating scale from the student, teacher, and parent. However, I know the way reality is, but just something to be thinking about. And if you look on the directions for the assignment, it's clear about the minimum expectations for this for our purposes. Then when we think about direct data collection, that's real time. A direct observation occurs when someone actually sees a student in the classroom setting and gathers data on the problem behavior. So we'll be doing that through an ABC analysis and through baseline data collection. So we will be doing that through the collection of duration, latency, event, or interval data, and we will be displaying that data using a line graph. And you can either create the line graph using Excel or write it out paper and pen. Information about that too is included on the assignment sheet that I just showed you within Canvas. Really, when you're thinking about baseline data, you need to be thinking about math, and that's why best practice is to communicate it in a line graph so that you're able to visually see the data and see the trends. So a little bit more about baseline data. Once a clear ABC pattern of behavior has been identified, further observation can provide baseline data about the problem or target behavior. It's important to select a baseline method that fits the behavior and is feasible in the classroom. So observers should consider one of 4 direct observation methods when collecting this type of data. You can put them into really 2 categories. So we have duration and latency, which are looking at length of time. So if length of time is our measurable factor in the problem behavior, then that would be the one that you would want to choose. If it's event and interval, so if you're thinking about how often a behavior occurs, that would be the one that you would want to choose. You could choose more than one. However, for our purposes here, I would generally recommend that you keep it pretty simple and just choose one. Once again, within the IRIS modules, there's explanations about the 2 types, but really the 4 different ways that you can collect this data, and there's a data collection sheets. It's all there. there's one important thing that I want to hit on here before wrapping up. You'll want to remember before implementing the intervention, baseline data should be collected over 3 to 5 observational blocks of time that are the same number of minutes in length across a variety of settings during their school day to ensure a representative sampling of the behavior. So for example, if you chose duration, then you collect that data 3 to 5 times. The same data collection procedure should be used for progress monitoring during the implementation of the intervention. So this allows the teacher to compare the intervention data to the baseline data to determine whether the intervention is effective. And like I said in the previous slide, this data is communicated on a line graph. So I feel like I did a lot of talking this week. I apologize for things being so lengthy, but this is one of our meatier weeks this week, and then week 4, and then we'll kind of stabilize a little bit for a while as you try out the intervention and we work on fine-tuning things. So let me know if you have any questions or concerns. I'm always available through email. If you need to set up a time to talk, I'm always happy to do that too. So have a great week, and this is a picture of me last week at our ski hill on a hike, and yes, I was wearing goggles. I think this was a day when it must have been, I don't know, it was just ridiculously cold. So thanks a lot.